So our next presenter is also from Michigan. He is from Deerfield Township, and he is a zoning administrator in Southeast Michigan. He is also the director of Interstate Informed Citizens Coalition and has testified on land use and energy policy issues in 10 states as well as Washington, D.C. Please welcome Kevin Martis.
Oh, these are dark days indeed when the fine people of Ohio have to turn to that state to the north. There was some kind of athletic contest in November, but I don't remember exactly how that turned out. But I can tell you I didn't bring that up when I spoke in Seneca County 3 years ago. Oh, it's getting real quiet now. Well, I wish I could say I'm glad to be here, but for me, I've been attending meetings like this since 2010. And it gets to be sad after a while. But I laud you for your courage and for your commitment to your communities. It's excellent that you're coming and taking the time to learn and to become engaged on this topic. When wind first showed up in my community, I was on the local planning commission, and I would say things are a little different in Ohio than in Michigan. In fact, Michigan is somewhat unique in that we have zoning and regulation of utility scale solar and wind still at the township level. Ohio had that up until 2007, and some folks were convinced that your average township is not equipped to deal with Fortune 500 companies, so they went to the state and asked for state control, state regulation, and that is in fact what happened. But I am proud to say that I worked behind the scenes with a committed group of folks from across the state who were successful in restoring to your county the right to determine your own land use future with respect to wind and solar. So you're blessed to have that opportunity back. If you look up Kevin Martis or Norm Stevens on the internet, it won't be too long until you find articles that tie us to the fossil fuel industry, to big tobacco, to big coal, to big oil. And so far we've been accused of being tied to everything except Sauron and the Dark Lords of Mordor. Apex is very busy in the middle of our state, and just like the article that targeted Norm, they've written an article later that said that my interstate coalition, which is nothing more than a bunch of folks like you who were formed when we were concerned about our county, our township, uses Nazi tactics and Gestapo-like deception to deceive people. In other words, everybody in the community thinks wind development is fantastic until a snake charmer like Norm or myself comes down and waves our magic wand, and suddenly you lose your ability to reason. And suddenly you can't think for yourselves, and suddenly you say, I thought these things were great, now I hate them. All because of Kevin Martis. Truth is, most of you don't know who I am. Most of you, judging by your yellow shirts, already have serious concerns, and I had nothing to do with it. In fact, it's kind of insulting to say that a group of people are so stupid that a guy who's an obvious liar or a shill for the fossil fuel industry could come in, say a couple clever things, and suddenly like, wow, you know, that's ridiculous. The other thing I will say is that I've been able to trace back the origin of most of these stories about me to Apex. There's an outfit called the Checks and Balances Project that runs articles about me. And at first I thought they were a left-leaning news organization, but it turned out, when I looked into them, they are funded. Actually, their website says they take strategic direction from a PR group called TigerCom. And TigerCom lists among their clients Apex Clean Energy. So that Apex, whose PR group publishes these articles about me, then sends those articles to their host communities and say, look, even the press says this guy's a bad guy. Well, yeah, it's circular. I mean, how nice is that? It's unbelievable. I have no ties to the fossil fuel industry. In fact, I don't know any wind activists in the country that gets any fossil fuel money, and I don't know any that have even had it offered to them. Frankly, if they offered it to me, I would say no. I've worked hard to my 55 years, 56 next weekend. to develop independent means so that I can have my own freedom of conscience to live the way I like and to speak the way I like, and I would not take payment to give anybody else's agenda. So just so we're clear on that. Normally, I would be giving a zoning talk, and I have about a 50-minute to an hour-long zoning talk, but here it's not relevant because you don't get to set your own standards for wind development here. We worked in the state of Ohio, and I've testified in front of the Ohio legislature several times, going all the way back to 2012, to try and give you some more flexibility, but in the end, the state has seen fit to basically give you a thumbs up or thumbs down. So I don't need to give a lot of long, tedious talks about zoning and setback distances and all that stuff. You guys basically have a yes or no vote here. And you're fortunate to have that restored again. Because the other communities that were successful in protecting themselves from irresponsible wind development in Ohio had one thing in common. They scraped together hundreds of thousands of dollars for extensive and long-term litigation ending up in the Ohio Supreme Court. And that's the only way that folks in Ohio have been able to protect themselves from some of these more predatory wind developers. Now you don't have to go through that, so you are very fortunate there. I want to share with you a quick story because when the wind developers came to my township, I was on the planning commission. And at first, in 2009, there were very few wind turbines anywhere in the Midwest, but there were a few in Michigan's thumb that we keep talking about. I mean, we've got to look foolish. Oh, I live up here. You know? But that's where the development was. I live right on the state line, just north of Toledo. I'm about 20 minutes from Toledo. But Norm lives 2.5, 3 hours from me. But we had to drive 3 hours to even see what wind turbines looked like, and at that point they were 390 feet tall. And I was a planning commissioner trying to do my research, and I thought, you know, I don't think they're great. It was not, if you go in the summertime, the odds of hearing turbines at their worst is pretty slim, particularly in July and August, because the wind doesn't blow strongly then. Spring, fall, night are your best times to hear it, blustery conditions. I said, but unless we get a lot of money for this, I don't see where this is really particularly good for our community. Then I came back home and started doing more research and got in connection with some folks who were living very near wind turbines. And I can tell you, I've heard testimony like Nikila and Carrie in 7 of the 10 states I've been in. Everybody that comes and talks is sharing the exact same kinds of experiences. So we put on a seminar in our gymnasium. We had about 300 people come from all over the state, because like solar is now, everybody's scrambling to understand utility scale solar where they're building 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 acres at a whack. Back then we were trying to learn our way around wind energy, so we brought in experts from around the country at our own expense to come and talk about this. We had a property value expert, an appraiser out of Chicago, my late friend Mike McCann. We brought in Robert Rand, an acoustician, who also testified with me in front of the legislature here in Ohio on noise issues all the way back to 2012. We brought these people in to do a seminar, but curiously, a couple from DeKalb, Illinois, named the Hulteens, wanted to come. They drove 5 hours each way in a snowstorm to speak at our event for free. They had 390-foot tall turbines near their house. And Stephanie wept as she talked about maybe one day having to move out of their house because of the noise. Also unannounced was a fellow named Kelly Alexander, who, if you've ever been to the Upper Peninsula, you see there's 2 small turbines right at the Mackinac Bridge. I think they're 300 foot, 290 foot. They were among the first ever built in the state. We didn't know he was coming. He drove down, walked onto the stage, drove, 4 or 5 hours in the same storm to say, I live by those turbines right there. Whatever you do, don't do it. They're 1,500 feet from my house. And they got in their cars and then they drove back home. And I got thinking, who would drive for free across the country in a snowstorm to lie to a group of people they've never met and then drive back home at their own expense? Nobody would. And these ladies didn't either. That's when I thought, we have got to take a much closer look at this. And I'll never forget, they played a video like you gals did that had iced rotor blades and the whistling noise. And our township clerk at the time said to Stephanie and to Dave, they told us when ice gets on the blade, they shut the turbines off. And she says, yeah, they told us that too. Then it registered. What's my point? When you're talking to a developer, you need to remember, you will never hear the truth from a person whose paycheck depends upon not knowing the truth. same meeting that I came up with a phrase off the top of my head, and I've used it in my presentations ever since, and it's this. Nobody ever came to your planning commission meeting and said, the light coming through my windows is too steady. Could you make it flicker once a second? Nobody's ever come in and said, it's too quiet outside my rural country home. Could you raise the noise level from 30 decibels to say 55? Nobody says our property values are too stable. Could you build some large industrial machines 1,500 feet from my bedroom window to place that property value at risk? Nobody says that. When I raise my hand and swear an oath of office as a planning commissioner, or I commit to work for community as a zoning administrator, my number one job is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, not to advance the economic agenda of an outside corporation. And the experts from that corporation have sworn no such oath to protect your community. In fact, their oath forbids them from giving advice that's harmful to their company's bottom line. It would be betrayal of their fiduciary obligation to their employers. But too often, officials who are not used to dealing with this stuff, and in my state, where we have some townships with 600 people being managed by a board of 5, they've never dealt with any kind of developer of any kind, ever. And now you have a Fortune 500 company beating on your door telling you your rights under the law and the things that you have to do to them. The stories that Norm told about the deceptions, we could go on all night. After a while, it looks like we're ganging up on them, but we're just explaining what actually happened in front of our own eyes. So it was a result of that seminar where people started calling me because they were desperate and hungry for information about wind energy development, and that's how I've ended up doing what I'm doing here tonight. So I will wrap this up. Like I say, I'm a little off script here because normally I have this much big PowerPoint presentation and so forth, but these ladies and Norm have covered so much. I would say your commissioners have in front of them a very important decision. Fortunately, they have complete authority to make this decision. I like the way the meeting began, was be respectful with those that disagree with you. Talk respectfully and productively with your commissioners. Meet with them personally when you can. That's what the wind developers do. Most of the time when you get to a meeting, the developers didn't wait for the public meetings to have all their discussions. They've been meeting with their commissioners or supervisors or trustees for a year or more, and the folks didn't even know. One of the gals who was a great activist in central Michigan would call up her official and say, I'd like 30 minutes of your time. Do you want a beer or coffee? I'll bring either one. And then she would go sit and talk with them. Talk with those folks. Let them know your concerns. It sounds to me like you've been doing exactly that. I do believe your officials are committed to doing what's in your best interest. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but talk to them. Bring them along. Explain your concerns. Generally, good folks will pay attention to that. And finally, I will leave you with one question and one you can ask Apex. Because in my township, 36 square miles, we had 2 developers, UV Wind, JUWI, a German company, which claimed to be the Midwest premier wind developer. Never heard of them since, but they were the premier then. And the other was John Deere, which then was bought by Exelon. So as a result, we got to hear all sides of these, and we had competing claims. Or I'll share this one anecdote before I close. We heard testimony from Exelon and UV about noise and setbacks recommendations. UV said 55 decibels and a 1,000-foot setback is acceptable. Exelon's expert, Peter Goldberg from Boston, he said 45 decibels and 1,320 feet is the right setback and noise limit. Say, okay, I'm a planning commissioner, I'm hearing these 2 things, so I said to this acoustic expert, are you prepared to say that the 1,000-foot setback and the 55 decibels just recommended by your competitor is unsafe? He said, yes, I am. So, oh my, we have an honest broker here. It wasn't 2 or 3 months later that the same guy that pronounced 55 and 1,000 feet unsafe went to Mason County, where he signed off on turbines being sited under 1,000 feet to people's homes and at a noise level much higher. Shall we say that wind energy experts are, if nothing else, flexible? I was involved in a case in Montana, and there was a court proceeding, and it came. They accused me of being funded, which I'm not. Look, I have had a 6-figure impact from my wind energy education over the last 10 years, but it's minus $100,000 over the last 10 years. It's not to the plus. It came out in court transcript that Dr. Chris Olson, who works for a lot of wind companies, had written a paper for Pattern Energy in Montana where they wanted to build a dozen or 2 dozen wind turbines on the banks of the Yellowstone River in the name of the environment. It's also the first time that the plaintiffs in the case arguably had more money than the wind company. That was unique. But it came out that Dr. Olson had received $50,000 to write one paper. $50,000. Can you imagine that? Again, you'll never get the truth from a person whose paycheck depends upon not knowing the truth. So, all that being said, you've heard the claims of the developers. What I said to UV Wind at one early meeting was, you've assured us that these won't cause substantial harm to birds, won't cause substantial harm to bats, won't adversely affect our property values, won't affect our sleep, won't become a general nuisance. If none of those claims turn out to be true, are you prepared to stand behind those statements tonight financially? And he says, we are not prepared to make that commitment tonight. What else do we need to know? It's impossible to argue with people who have $100 bills stuffed in their ears. So I wish you all good luck.